Hi, today I want to share some thoughts with you on the subject of in the middle of it. And I think this scene is an appropriate theme and a picture for what I'm going to talk about. I think oftentimes you and I, and maybe the people in your life, and sometimes in my life too, believe that we are the only ones that are struggling with what we're struggling with right now. I'm sure you've gone through some situations in your life that you look around you and everybody else seems to be moving on with their life except you or except me. And that's the big picture of what I want to share with you here today. Gary Richmond shares in a book called A View from a Zoo. He says the first things to emerge are the baby giraffe's front hooves and head. This is about a giraffe being born. A few minutes later, the plucky newborn is hurled forth and falls 10 feet and lands on its back. Within seconds, he rolls up to an upright position with his legs tucked under his body, and from this position, he considers the world for the very first time and then shakes himself. The mother giraffe lowers her head long enough to take a quick look. Then she positions herself directly over the calf. She waits for about a minute, then does the most unreasonable thing. She swings her long leg outward and kicks her baby so it goes sprawling head over heels. When it does get up, the violent process is repeated over and over again. The struggle to rise is momentous. As the baby calf grows tired, the mother kicks it again to stimulate its effort. Finally, the calf stands for the first time on its wobbly legs, and then the mother giraffe does the most remarkable thing. She kicks it off its feet again. Why? Listen, she wants to remember how it got back up. Life is all about getting knocked down in order to remember how to get back up again. And I can't tell you that I know I'm not the only one that struggles with that situation on a regular basis. In the Bible, in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, it says that God will not leave you. It says we're hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we're not destroyed. I don't know about you, but I know in my life there have been many times when I didn't think I could get back up again. In fact, there are some days, even this day and yesterday and maybe tomorrow, that I didn't think, or maybe I won't be able to think I can get back up again. Maybe today I'm sharing more for me than for you. I don't know. But I think you can relate to what I'm going to talk about here today. Margaret Thatcher said one time, standing in the middle of the road is very dangerous. You get knocked down by the traffic from both directions. I think over and over, at least in the Bible, there are examples of human beings having to push to realize God's best for their life. In the New Testament, there's this book of the Bible called Hebrews. And in this 11th chapter of Hebrews, it lists a boatload of people who were going through some very difficult times, but because of their tenacity, they were able to overcome it. Let me just share just a few of the people in that situation. It talks about, in fact, there's a part of that text in verse number 6 in Hebrews 11. It says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. It talks about Abraham, how Abraham, several thousand years ago, lived in a very well-to-do place. He was wealthy, he was settled, he had family, but he felt the urge to do something different, to go to another place where he had never been before, to eventually realize an opportunity that he never thought existed. Sometimes it's really terrifying in the middle of what you're going through to even imagine that there's something greater than what you're going through right now, because the temptation is to think that what you're going through right now will always be. Let me say that again. There's always a temptation to believe that what you're going through right now will always be. That's been my challenge consistently in my life. So Abraham was one example. There was a situation where the story about Abraham. A little later in his life, he was married to a woman named Sarah who could not conceive. And Sarah and Abraham were very old, 80s, 90s. I mean, way beyond the years that normal people would have children. So the story goes that one day God came to speak to Sarah and Abraham and suggested to them that in a matter of a very short amount of time, they were going to have a child. And Sarah laughed. The story says in the Bible that Sarah laughed, even considering the fact that she could get pregnant and have a child. Well, when you're in the middle of stuff, when you think that there's no chance of anything good coming out of your life, it's very easy to not look at what is possible. And it's often tempting to look back at what was and the difficulty and the pain that you've gone through and not look at what's potentially there for you. Zig Ziglar said one time, who was a great motivational speaker, a teacher of salespeople, he said, getting knocked down in life is a given. Again, getting knocked down is a given, but getting up and moving forward is a choice. And I can't emphasize that enough to you because it is often tempting to stay down because of discouragement, because of the pain of getting knocked down over and over again. It is terribly difficult to have the courage to get back up because all you want to do is crawl up in a ball and die. And I could go on and on about that for the next week. If you go back to Hebrews, the same chapter I was talking to earlier, there's a story about Moses who was involved in a situation that if he just kept his mouth shut, things would have been going really well for him. In fact, he had everything he needed. He was adopted into a rich family. He was able to have anything he wanted. But then he opened up his mouth. He opened up his mouth for the benefit of other people, created a situation for him that initially was very, very bad, but ultimately saved the lives of millions of people. Again, some things that happen, at least in my mind, don't make any sense at all. In fact, they make the opposite sense of what you would do or what I would do. But in time, not always, but in time, and sometimes, there are good things that come out of bad things. And for me, in my world these days, I don't see all those good things yet. All I see are those bad things. And I think you can relate to that. That at the moment, what you're going through, how can anything good come out of this? So you see over a period of time that when you go through the most difficult times in your life, you build up the muscle, for the lack of a better term, to get back up again. In fact, there's a musical group out called Toby Mac, and they have a song out. They wrote it some years back, and it's called Get Back Up. Let me just share the words, or part of the words to that song. It says, "You turned away when I looked you in the eye and hesitated when I asked if you were all right. Seems like you're fighting for your life, but why, oh why? Wide awake in the middle of your nightmare, you saw it coming, but you hit it out of nowhere." Sorry, going through some stuff at home. "And there's always scars when you fall back far. When you lose your way, we get back up again. It's never too late to get back up again. One day you will shine again. You may get knocked down, but not out forever. Lose our way, we get back up again. So get up, get up. You're going to shine again. Never too late to get back up again. You may get knocked down, but not out forever." The song goes on. "You're rolled out at the dawning of the day, heart racing as you made it little getaway. It feels like you've been running all your life, but why, oh why? So you've pulled away from the love that's always been there. You start believing that your situation's unfair, but there's always scars when you fall back far." And then he goes on to say that you get back up again, you get back up again. You know, the hardest part to do is to get back up again. Our daughter, Juliana, passed away on October 24th, 2016 of, well, we're not sure what exactly at the moment, but she fought cancer 8 times. Since 2007. And every time Juliana got cancer, she'd get back up again and kept fighting. You know, she never remembered being healthy because she was 5 years old when she first got sick and passed away at age 14 in October of 2016. So I often, at least in my life, I look at the people around me and people I read about who've gone through some really difficult times, and they kept getting back up again. And how they did it, I'm nowhere near as strong as Juliana. And I know you know people in your life that keep getting back up again over and over again, and you're like, how can they do it? Well, I don't necessarily have all that answer here today, but I do know that it is a choice for you and I to keep getting back up again, even though every cell in our body, like I said moments ago, we just want to curl up and die. Christopher Lemon writes, "The pit bull, as you know it, is bred to be a fighter. But what you may not know is what they were originally bred to fight with. The pit bull is actually a mutt that made good. Having terrier and mastiff breeds in its line, from the mastiff side of the tree, they are descended from bulldogs, which is pre-industrial England were farm dogs. To protect the farmer from the bull when he was trying feed and to castrate or breed him, if the bull turned to gore the farmer, the bulldog, listen, would subdue the bull by biting the bull on the nose and holding on until the bull submitted." Check this out. Because of the nature of their job, bulldogs were bred to have a powerful, muscular body and the resolve, listen, this is a big point for me, and the resolve to hold on until a violently struggling bull, even when injured. You see, that's the part of the story that it seems that St. Paul tried to get across in the New Testament of the Bible, that even though you're going through some really difficult times, you need to hang on. And that is not easy. I'm telling you flat out from my own world and my own life, the temptation to not want to hang on is so great that it can literally take you off your feet very, very quickly. Again, in these broadcasts, I do not pretend to have all the answers. I don't pretend that I have all my stuff together, because I do not. So I'm telling you right now that I'm struggling with the same thing many times that I'm sharing with you on these shows. I haven't arrived by any stretch of the imagination. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4 in the Bible, it says, "We're afflicted in every way, but not crushed, not perplexed, but not driven to despair. We're persecuted, but not forsaken. We're struck down, but not destroyed." The context of that text is that was a new religion coming onto the scene called Christianity. In that culture, the culture was either Jewish or people who lived in Greece and Rome that had many gods. And the initial Christian religious people were persecuted because it was new and it was a little different than the Jewish culture. So that's what they were talking about. But then over in the Old Testament, David wrote in Psalm 23, David was a shepherd. His job when he was younger was to take care of the sheep of his dad's. He was employed by his dad to take care of the sheep. And in that culture, that was part of his wealth. So there was a big responsibility. So as a shepherd, in the 23rd Psalm, in verse 4, it says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for God is with me, and your rod and your staff comfort me." That is, the tools of the shepherd are there to protect the sheep. And he used that analogy to say that even though you and I go through some very difficult times, God is there in the middle of the difficult times. Now, I could go on for a couple of days of trying to figure out why God allows stuff to happen. I will never understand it. I don't even agree with it. And some days, to be extremely blunt with you, God and I don't get along. I don't like God very much some days, and I'll be polite in my description of those feelings. But in the middle of what you're going through, there is the potential for you to keep moving forward in the middle of your darkest times. And I cannot overemphasize enough that sometimes seems to be impossible. Sometimes we try to keep moving forward so much, and it seems like the results in which we're trying to achieve, or the goals that we're trying to achieve, seems to be getting farther and farther away. And I think you can relate to that sometimes. But if you and I stop in the journey to get to those goals that we've been striving to get to for so long, then without a doubt they're going to get farther and farther away, because we're going to get weaker in the process, because we stop moving forward and stop continuing to try to reach the goals that we're trying to reach in our life. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, in the scriptures, it says that, my paraphrase of that text is that life is more than what we see. That is, life is more than the obvious. It's frankly more than you and I can imagine, because there's a good side and there's a bad side. There's God's side, and then there's the devil's side, or evil. And if you and I understand that if there's a good side that wants the best for us, but there's also a bad side that wants to stop us from the good things that we're trying to get, doesn't that suggest to us that there's a battle between good and evil? There's a battle between us trying to get where we need to be, and then there's powers and people maybe in our lives that don't want us to get there. There's a story I read some time back. It says, one day a group of scientists got together and decided that man had come a long way and no longer needed God. So they picked one scientist to go and tell God that they were done with him. So the scientist walked up to God and said, God, we've decided that we no longer need you. We're to the point that we can clone people and do many miraculous things, so why don't you just go on and get lost? God listened very patiently and kindly to the man. And after the scientist was done talking, God said, very well, how about this? Let's say we have a man-making contest. To which the scientist replied, okay, great, no problem. But God added, now we're going to do this just like I did back in the old days with Adam. Remember Adam and Eve? The scientist said, sure, no problem. And bent down and grabbed himself a handful of dirt. So the backstory of Adam and Eve, for those who don't know, is that God took some dirt and designed a man from, the scripture says, from the dust of the ground, or the dirt of the ground. So again, the scientist said, sure, no problem, and bent down and grabbed himself a handful of dirt. God looked at him and said, no. Get your own dirt. The point being is that sometimes you and I think that we have all the answers, when in fact, sometimes the answers are farther above what we can even imagine. Bishop Abraham wrote, as someone aptly stated, Jesus does not want just to be resident in you, he wants to be president in you. Ah, yes, he said, when we relinquish our struggles, we find our rest in Christ. Then the winds of the storm may blow, but we find ourselves fixed on the rock. I could go on about that issue with my personal struggles with that for the next hour, but I'll just keep moving forward. Jesse Duplantis wrote, just because God's telling you to do something, or suggesting you to do something, or putting a desire in your heart to do something, it doesn't mean it'll be easy. God has confidence in you that you can get the job done. The natural side of things may show that the odds are against you, but with God backing you, you can't lose. So listen to God. Put your foot down and conquer your fear and failure and possess what God's given you. Again, that's so much easier said than done. Because once again, the temptation for you and I is to stop when we run across a difficulty. I can remember so many times when I'll have the family in the car and we come into a backup, and I despise backups. I would rather go half an hour out of my way if I am driving, if I keep going, instead of sitting in traffic and doing nothing at all. It just drives me out of my mind. Over in Philippians chapter 4, St. Paul, when he was alive several thousand years ago, at one time he was a persecutor of this new religion called Christianity. Then, long story short, he became one of the biggest fans of Christianity, and then was also a tool to expand that faith in that culture. He said in Philippians 4, he says, I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound, or to have good things. In any and every circumstance, listen, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. He says, I can do all things through God who strengthens me, or him. So it's really difficult to keep going in the middle of some really tough times in your life. And I'm telling you, man, it is the challenge to just give up and throw in the towel. I'll be completely blunt. The challenge to give up and throw in the towel can be an hour-by-hour temptation. And on the flip side of that same coin, it could be for you too, an hour-by-hour decision to keep going in the middle of your darkest days. I'm tempted to go deeper into that, so I'll attempt to do that without crying. But since Juliana's been gone, the temptation for me to just die, to give up, to quit, to just end everything has been tremendous. And this is something I wouldn't normally share, but I feel that somebody watching may understand what I'm going through, and maybe you're going through the same thing. That the temptation is to just end it all, if I could be brutally blunt, because the pain is so great. It's overwhelming. The pain is so great. So sometimes making the decision to keep going may not even be a long-term decision. Maybe it's by the half hour that I've decided to stay for another half hour. And that turns into an hour. That turns into 3 hours. That turns into a day. That turns into I'm going to decide to stick around until next Wednesday, or whatever timeline you choose to use. Because imagining yourself getting through this thing in the next year, whatever your thing is, your difficulty, your struggle, is too much for your head to even grasp, because the pain is so great. So if you break it down into smaller bites, it might be a little bit easier for you to handle. Mark Thornton writes, he says, as I was getting ready to come to church today, I was helping my son to get a bath. And quite frankly, he didn't want to take a bath, especially because he couldn't sit and play in the tub for a while. And so he resisted and made it difficult. So he began struggling, but I got him clean for the most part. As we finished up, I told him to stand up and get out so we could get him dried off and dressed for church, to which he responded, "I can't." I replied, "What do you mean you can't?" He scowled at me and said, "Daddy, I can't." Now, unfortunately, we've been through this routine before, so I knew how to respond. "You mean you don't want to, right?" To which he begrudgingly nodded. It wasn't that he couldn't get out. He didn't want to get out of the bathtub. He wanted to stay in and play for a while. All I couldn't help but think that this was so familiar in the way that we respond to the things that we're supposed to be doing in life. God asks us sometimes to do something, or we reply, "God, I can't do this," or "I'm too old," or "I'm too young," or "I'm not ready," or "Maybe I'm too busy," or "Maybe I have too many other things on my mind." But deep down, what you're really saying is, "I don't want to. I don't want to do it. I don't want to change, I don't want to sacrifice, and I don't want to stretch." You know how painful it is sometimes to stretch, to do things that are terrifying in the middle of your pain, in the middle of your agony, in the middle of situations in your life where you've got water on one side and you've got water on the other side, and you can't swim. So there's one path that you have to take that path, and that path is terrifying. It rips your heart out because there's no other option for you to go down. I think some of you can relate to what I'm talking about. Ben Carson wrote in his book, Gifted Hands, "Success is determined not by whether or not you face obstacles, but by your reaction to them. And if you look at these obstacles as a containing fence, listen, they become your excuse for failure. If you look at them as a hurdle, each one strengthens you for the next." I can't tell you that enough, because you and I have an opportunity to either, this is a hard one to swallow for me, to learn to swim in the middle of your difficulty, or to use the difficulty as an excuse not to swim through the difficulty. And that's really hard for me to even say, let alone for you to listen to. Because in the middle of your darkest days, the last thing you want to do is keep going forward, to keep moving in a direction that you frankly don't even want to go to, just like the little boy. You and I have an understanding that if it's going to be, the old saying is that it's up to me, and sometimes you just can't go around it. Sometimes you have to dig under the obstacle. Sometimes you have to fly over it. Sometimes you just have to blow up the obstacle in your life in order to get through it. Chris Jammy wrote one time, he says, there is a greater Christian faith than one which settles for temporary happiness. And that is the augmentation of faith. The more faithful you become, the harder the obstacles get. But the harder the obstacles get, the tougher your spine grows. And the tougher your spine grows, the less dependent you are on man's approval. So in the middle of it, I'm going to ask you to stand up, to keep fighting, and never, ever, ever quit. My name is John Carver, and thank you for watching.